Welcome to Queer News Tonight, the world's first and only LGBTQ plus daily evening news. It's time to queer up the news. It's 8 p.m. Wednesday, February 9, 2022, and we are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we're going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight.
This is the world's first live daily LGBTQ evening news show, literally out of the closet and into the headlines on Queer News Tonight with Al Ferguson.
Thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. This is the world's first and only unedited live LGBTQ plus evening news show. Whatever happens, you will see it. Queer News Tonight is supported by viewers like you. We are part of the partnership between Happening Out Television Network and Hotspots Magazine. Hotspots is celebrating 36 years of the LGBTQ plus experience. We bring you the best of LGBTQ plus news, entertainment, and support of our community.
I'm your anchor at Queer News Tonight, Al Ferguson. Let's welcome anchor John Hayden. John's been a journalist for 27 years and now works for several South Florida outlets, including SFGN, covering politics, arts, and the bar scene, mostly for the latest on his own happy hours. He spent much of his career covering the stupidity and scandals of Hollywood and interviewed nearly every big name in television, movies, and music. John considers the time he had to sit and interview Shirley MacLaine after she yelled at him as the scariest 4 minutes in his life. Good evening, John. Good evening, Al. So excited to be here tonight. Now let's welcome anchor, or we can anchor, Dan Rios. He is the director of LGBTQ plus marketing for Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau, the official destination marketing organization for Greater Miami and Miami Beach. And it's not any good unless it's official. He's joining the marketing team and tourism division back in 2002. Dan is considered one of America's top experts on LGBTQ plus travel and tourism. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Great to be here. It's been a couple of months, so happy to be back. Let's welcome anchor Jeff Oliverio. He is a founding member and treasurer of the Hollywood LGBTQ Plus Council, a unique community civic organization designed to unite the LGBTQ plus community in Greater Hollywood. The council recently hosted the inaugural My Hollywood Pride. He's also the chair for the 2022 National LGBTQ Task Force Gala being held in October 2022 in Miami Beach. Good evening, Will.
Good.
Jeff.
Hey, Will.
Hey, Will. Let's welcome anchor Gregg Shapiro, a 1999 inductee into the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame. Gregg is the author of 2 short story collections and 6 books of poetry, including his latest, Fear of Muses. An entertainment journalist whose celebrity interviews and music reviews run in a variety of regional LGBTQ plus and mainstream publications and websites. His movie review column called Screensaver can be found in South Florida Gay News, San Francisco's Bay Area Reporter, RottenTomatoes.com, and more. Good evening, Gregg.
Happy National Bagel and Lox Day. Big pink fish on a big stale donut.
I'll take a Cape Bird.
We are the reporters for Queer News Tonight, and this evening we begin with the queer headlines. The LGBTQ plus community in South Florida and across America is diverse. Our community across the world is vast. And here are the bullet points of the queer news for today, Wednesday, February 9th.
Well, we're going to begin by queering up education. Florida is pushing Don't Say Gay legislation, even limiting speech about the bill. Watch this.
Nurse practitioner from Miami, a recent adjunct at Miami-Dade College, and a captain in the Florida National Guard, and I'm here because I love our state. Representative Avila said that we should focus on what individuals face in life, not the groups they belong to. To that, I say that some individuals face life differently because of the groups they belong to. We need to be honest about this. I remember learning about the brave Cuban exiles who lost their lives at the Bay of Pigs. I saw my neighbors in their faces. I remember learning about the Japanese American families who were ripped from their homes during World War II because they looked like the enemy. I saw myself in those faces. I remember learning about Ruby Bridges, who needed to be protected by armed guards so that her school could be desegregated, and I saw my best friend in her face. I remember learning about women being given the right to vote. I saw my mother, and I learned that Don't Ask, Don't Tell had been repealed so that I could serve my country openly. I was one of those faces. Our faces tell a story and our lives tell a story. Lines 64 to 67 specifically prevent talking honestly about how an individual's privilege or oppression may be determined by his race or her race, color, sex, or national origin. I was born less than 30 miles from North Korea. When Fidel Castro died, I watched the Kim regime mourn his death. For kids that lived under Castro or Kim, learning honestly about history is and was impossible. Representatives, please make learning honestly about history a priority. Let our teachers do their jobs, let our kids hear these unvarnished stories and see our faces, see themselves in each other, and build empathy so that we can all learn from our history and not repeat the mistakes of the past. Please vote no. Thank you.
Well, yesterday, the Florida Senate Education Committee held a hearing on the controversial Don't Say Gay bill. So many people appeared to speak out against the bill that most speakers only had just 30 seconds to say their entire piece. The bill is sponsored by Senator Dennis Baxley. Again, Senator Dennis Baxley. And during the hearing, he was even questioned by two of his fellow Republicans about the severity and broad-reaching scope of this bill. At the end of the hearing, however, the committee voted on the bill 6-3 along party lines to push it out of committee.
Well, I think this just shows that this particular bill, much like the banning trans kids from school sports last year, is a fait accompli at this point. How do we affect change? We vote this November to try and just stem the tide and then start working to take back the legislature, take back the governor's mansion, and take back the Supreme Court, which of course will take a long, long time.
Well, I just think, this story of limiting speech in school and learning about history, it mirrors obviously the topic about critical race theory with the LGBTQ plus experience and not being able to share that in school and erasing those stories is so detrimental to not only LGBTQ plus families or children, but also to the world in general of telling those stories. I actually was at an event over the weekend for the Trayvon Martin Foundation, and they were talking about critical race theory and not telling these stories, and how the stories that have been told are the reason why we're at the place we are today. Right. And that at one point they had to tell those stories just in their families and in their household because it wasn't taught in schools, and it took over time for those stories to be told in truth in schools, and that's how we've learned about the experience of slavery and all these other things. So this is just taking, unfortunately in Florida, taking us back 50 years again. Mm-hmm.
And Baxley is an insensitive and ill-informed bigot. Fight the real enemy.
Props.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, I'm thinking that one of the things that makes people more comfortable and understand is actually talking about it and listening to things, and it makes all of us more tolerant and open to differences. That's exactly what they are trying to step away from.
Well, Republicans have no tolerance for tolerance.
That's right. Yeah. Tolerance. That's right. It's interesting to me that a bill is introduced in Florida to basically say you can't speak on a subject. Remember, the ramifications are perhaps not the primary school nature of the bill, but the broadness of being able to put your foot in the door and then reinterpret it over time. That's the danger, the super danger here, leading to banning GSAs, leading even to preventing discussing mental health in schools and suicide prevention of LGBTQ youth. This is a devastating bill. And I think an indication of the proof of how zealot and how much zealotry is going on here is that not only do we not want students to speak in school, we don't even want you to voice any opposition to it, so we'll limit even the ability to talk about the bill itself.
I've also been shocked that corporate America hasn't stepped up and said, why are we going to want our businesses to run in a state that's not going to allow free speech essentially in schools and teaching children about actual history? With the trans bill, in North Carolina, we had all these corporations coming out saying we're going to boycott North Carolina. I haven't seen that start as in fervor yet, but I hope it does. I hope that corporations out there are seeing what's happening here in Florida and step up and say, we don't want this happening
I'm curious, in following up that observation about business, let's reduce it 10,000 feet. Do you think, Jeff, that our own community, LGBTQ community, is talking enough publicly in our local communities about this bill and why it must be stopped?
I don't. I don't. I think that people are actually falling on deaf ears in some ways, because it feels to me like we're too comfortable. And this is just one step. This is a slippery slope of events that can occur in the state, just like repealing abortion or all of these things. They take little steps over time to take away our civil rights.
That's where we're at.
We move on and queer up South Florida gay news. Wilton Manors shows a social rift as two competitive events celebrate Black History Month. Sometimes two halves don't make a whole, and that is clearly evident after efforts to celebrate Black History Month in Wilton Manors ended in a schism driven by organizational issues and accusations of a lack of financial transparency. In this week's SFGN, online and on stands tomorrow, I look at how plans for one great event ended up being two underperforming events. From organizational issues, like not knowing you can't serve alcohol at an elementary school park, to an inability of planners to get for planners of the fundraiser to get along. Nothing ever quite gelled. This past weekend, I, along with my colleague Al Ferguson, attended both. The main event had a DJ, soul food, and a proclamation from Wilton Manors marking the occasion. But there was no real program where any real history or culture was highlighted. The other event had the field day activities set up, part of the cookout spirit and tradition. But they didn't have people. We stopped by at 1 when they were still setting up, and again around 4, and none of the dozen or so people were engaged in the fun part of field day. In the end, both events came up short, and the community of Wilton Manors lost an opportunity to come together to support and learn from our LGBTQ+ Black brothers and sisters.
That's disappointing. You know, I was really in favor of the event. I actually had planned on attending and had a family matter that came up and I couldn't make it. But you know, this is not uncommon in our own community of kind of, you know, having territorial issues. And I think it just highlights the fact that, you know, there's all these other forces working against us, whether it's in the you know, for people of color or LGBTQ people. We need to come together and we need to find ways to build bridges with our organizations and common ground to really highlight these events, because we shouldn't be competing.
No, and as you said, others are already working so hard to divide us that now more than ever we need to be united, show united face.
You know, we're in a situation where I think interesting, because like in what we just talked about in Don't Say Gay, the first step to improve the situation in our community is to talk about it and have vigorous debate and conversation, even if it's not the words or intents that you would like to hear. The counterintuitive nature of your acceptance is probably beneficial for all of us. I think one of the points, John, I applaud South Florida Gay News for handling this story in the way that they're doing, because it's important for our community. And I think it is an interesting situation that we've got to address in 2022 head on. The L in our community frequently separates from the G, and the G in our community frequently separates from the T. And we have race issues. There's been conversation about race in some of our clubs in Wilton Manors, and this is another implementation, even in the Black community, of a separation of differences, of turf protection. We first and foremost, if we're going to ever try to solve these problems, to unite like we're all saying we should, we have to talk about why is this happening? And what do we think about it? And what are we going to do to stop it? And what are we going to do to change it? And then turn our attention to our real enemies, which are not in our own community. Well, let's move to another interesting topic, and that's going to be religion, I think.
Let's queer up religion. Interviews show religion is creating devastating trauma on LGBTQ+ people. This week, Australia is getting ready to push through their controversial religious discrimination bill that allows for businesses and churches to deny service to people based on religious freedom. Joel Hollier from the University of Sydney interviewed 24 LGBTQIA+ people who had all spent time in a range of conservative Christian denominations, many of whom had grown up attending religious schools. They almost universally described trauma based on their identity, often being told that their identity was broken. According to those interviewed, words to this effect are spoken gently by chaplains in the corridors, loudly by peers in the playground, and formally by executive staff in the office. Gay people are compared with murderers. Trans people are depicted as threats to the order of society. Parents absorb these messages and reinforce them, either explicitly or by their resounding silence.
Religion, it's always the best topic at family reunion dinner table.
Thanksgiving,
Always.
that's right.
Thanksgiving.
Well, may I suggest two websites? One is the Freedom from Religion, which is ffrf.org. Also, secularhumanism.org. Those are two very gentle and loving organizations that might help people who are feeling trapped and troubled by their religious foundations.
And what makes it scarier for children is that this is hate under the banner of love. And so they grow up thinking, I didn't grow up in a super conservative Christian household. I was raised Catholic, Saturday evening Catholic. But at the same time, gay was still treated as the lesser in schools. And it was all under the banner of, we're doing this to help you because we love you. So we're going to hate on you. And that's what kids digest until they can get out, if they ever are able to free their mind and do it.
You know, I brought this up so many times, but I still believe the fact that churches get tax exemptions when I pay taxes, but that they can create discriminatory programs. If you want to have a discriminatory program, then have a club where you pay taxes, because that's what that is.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, you know, we should be granting that here in this country. And again, I'm sure in other countries as well, they all have these tax exemptions as institutions, and they should be taken away if they have these type of discriminatory policies.
You know, just historically, I know everyone here at the table has traveled extensively. Leader in tourism, sitting next to me. We know in Europe, church is perceived completely different than it is in America. We are much more evangelical here than they are in Europe, and as a result, that is one of the things that separates us in terms of how discrimination propels so effortlessly historically in America. We also have to remember, I was raised Southern Baptist, and I am of religious faith today, but that does not excuse bigotry and discrimination in my church. And historically, church in America have brushed away women. They've brushed away black people. They've brushed away LGBT. They've brushed away most of American society with the exception of one group, white men. That is an indication that church is not absolutely correct. They come from a perspective that gets up on the backs of those that they are going to oppress. And that's frequently what happens in church in America, certainly in terms of what happens for LGBT. I just remind you, we broadcast from the Happening Out television studios at the largest queer church in the world. If you don't have a place, try Sunshine Cathedral. Try Unity on the Bay in Miami, and you're going to find welcoming places that are of religious faith, that believe in God, but they also say love is love.
Yeah, I was going to add to that also, you know, as another plug for the task force, but we actually displayed this year at the gala the Shower of Stoles, which is stories of clergy that were excommunicated from their churches or temples and telling their story. And the Welcoming Project on if you go to the task force website, really highlights that program that they've really tried to integrate, you know, church with the LGBTQ community, and you know, sitting here at SunServe is a good reminder of that.
I have to put in one more observation about hypocritical. There are studies that indicate that as many as half of all of the priests in the Catholic Church are gay. Half. Yeah. It is hypocrisy. It is hypocrisy. Liberty University is started by not the real moral majority. I'll just leave it at that. There is hypocrisy at play here, and we should be willing to call it out and say, you know, you cannot be absolutist or absolutely right when you benefit your religion on the backs of oppressed minorities. It is just not godlike.
Well, speaking of oppression, so let's queer up politics. Florida fever
Who
spreading.
wrote the show tonight,
I
by the
don't
way?
know. It's amazing. Florida fever spreading as more states now want to restrict LGBTQ plus in schools. Don't worry, Florida, you're not the only backward state trying to hide the fact that LGBTQ plus people exist from children. At least 7 states have introduced bills to restrict how teachers and textbooks discuss LGBTQ plus individuals and history. It's not just the laws trying to prevent little Bobby or Susie discussing their same-sex parents in class that are being passed. It's also about passing laws to help people forget that racism is a real thing and blocking the discussion of racial bias and systematic racism. Proponents of the curriculum bills say that they are designed to give parents a say in their kids' schools and protect kids. But LGBTQ plus advocates say the bills, if they become law, will put already at-risk kids in more danger of mental health issues or bullying, and even put them at risk of being outed to their families. Oh, Florida.
It's a relief that we're not the only crazies. It's kind of a nice change, it's nice.
Yeah, to be in that company, is that what
Well,
you
to
mean?
be not the only one.
Not
When you're
to be
the only
the
one,
only
that's pretty
crazy
bad.
Well, but it's lazy legislation. These are all the same bills. I mean, the Republicans have outsourced thought to think tanks. These are written by like the American Enterprise Institute, faxed out because Republicans still fax because that's how far behind the times they are, and will get a local name slapped on it, and it moves through their legislatures. And I'm not going to say that all Republicans are racists and bigots, but they have no problem being represented by racists and bigots at all levels of government.
Unfortunately, that's true. And the facts theory that you just propelled, of course, that's exactly what happened on the alternative state list of electors. Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, they were all almost identical because it came out of the same fax machine somewhere deep in Palm Beach Island somewhere. I'm not quite sure.
But it's a terrifying attack on students, being there, being in a place where you're not allowed to be, you're portrayed as so bad that you can't even speak about who you are. It's terrible. I mean, we're going back centuries.
You give me an absolute segue to say, wait, we've seen this a number of times in American history in the last century. 1937, there was a whole cadre of people in the United States that was supporting what was going on in Berlin, Germany against the Jews. And they did the exact same thing. Let's rewrite the school books. Let's prevent them from being able to discuss and teach in schools about Jewish history. It happened in 1949 in the United States when it had to do with the progression of women's rights, and more women were becoming more powerful and voting, so let's minimize the discussion of women's rights in America. Oh, by the way, it happened again in 1958 as black rights and black civil rights began to take hold, especially in terms of the big case that took place in Arkansas, and as a result we'll revise our history to minimize the growth of what's happening in the black community. And oh, by the way, it happened again in 1969 when the queer community finally said there's enough and we are going to throw a brick at people in a community in southern Manhattan to say enough is enough. We have seen this over and over again. We've seen this playbook over and over again. We're going to introduce, by the way, you don't know this, we are going to introduce in support of what is happening here, these books, for example, that are under full attack. We are going to launch, everybody knows about book clubs. We're going to, at Happening on Television Network, start a project on a book club, except our book club is going to be called the Banned Book Club.
Oh, that's great.
And so far, you will be shocked, we're going to interview authors of books that are under attack all over America, especially in LGBT, also in black civil rights. So far, 19 books banned in the United States. Is this 1937 in Berlin? You wonder.
Can we call the series Boys in the Band? B-A-N-N-E-D?
Boys in the
Nice. Very nice. Now it's time to queer up the USA. An Arizona surprise as bipartisan support grows to expand LGBTQ plus rights. A new bipartisan bill to protect LGBTQ plus individuals from discrimination is making headway in Arizona. Democratic State Representative Amish Shah, one of the main sponsors of the bill, said, quote, The coalition supporting this are people from so many walks of life coming together based on values of fairness and freedom for all, end quote. Episcopal Diocese of Arizona Bishop Jennifer Redall said, quote, "This bill means that every Arizonan can be viewed just for who they are, for who God made them in the image of God, and not be discriminated against," end quote. The bill has a religious exemption, but it only applies to churches, not individuals and businesses who claim their religion requires them to discriminate. What kind of a person wants to be in a religion that would require them to discriminate? That just seems like, oh, well, I'll sign up for that one. That sounds like a good religion.
Go to Oakland Park and US 1.
The hate church.
I'll get you
Gotcha.
in. I know someone at the door.
I mean, just going back again to these, introducing all these bills, and we're seeing, this wave of bills coming out in the Republican Party against LGBTQ or, teaching about, civil rights history. I think we have to go back and say the organization that they have, we're making a joke that there's 7 states doing it. What are we doing in 7 states to fight for our rights? Do we see 7 bills being presented to protect LGBTQ plus rights? We do not see that. And the organization, this is where talking about coming together as a community and being awake of what's happening, we are not talking about it enough. I agree with you 100% Al.
Yeah. On Friday, I'm going to St. Petersburg to the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus Convention. And I'm going over for interviews. We're going to interview Val Deming, and we're going to interview Nikki Fried and Charlie Criss and lots of other people that are coming to speak to the LGBTQ community in Florida to say we can win, we can win, we can win. We'll see. We'll see. And the reason on we'll see is exactly what you just said. I'm hosting a panel for the caucus. And the title of the panel that they've asked me to host is called "What the Hell is Happening in Tallahassee?" And it's an interesting subject because if the Democratic Party doesn't stand up and introduce their own bills of protection and put them out on the line to say yes or no. Just vote. We just want to know where you sit. And especially if the LGBTQ community doesn't come out and say this is important, how can we possibly expect anything to change? And this is the focus of why white gay privilege is so important now. Because I have the least to lose this year. The least. If you are a black trans woman of color, if you're a trans woman of color, if you're a lesbian, if you are Latino, if you are a person of color broadly in LGBT, you have so much to lose. If you are a voiceless student in school, you have everything to lose. Who's going to stand up for you? And if white gay men don't, we don't have a chance. And that's what's going on.
Next, we report on our partnership with Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale. We are broadcasting from our permanent set here at Sunshine in support of that partnership. Happening Out Television Network broadcasts the largest LGBTQ plus religious live broadcast in the world, as more than 30,000 watch every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Watch this.
My name is Stefania St. Lords, and I am Miss Miami Beach Gay Pride, and Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church.
That is today's news from the LGBTQ plus community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ plus evening news show. Is our community important to you?
If it is, then like and subscribe. Ring the bell for updates. There's an actual icon that you can press. If you have just click on it. It's a bell.
Anybody you know, Jeff?
I know someone that needs to ring the bell. Put it that way.
Share the news with your family and your friends.
Post this broadcast in the many groups you are a member of. Tonight's stories about our community deserve the attention of your family and friends.
Queer News Tonight is the only live LGBTQ plus digital television show in the world that is out of the closet and into the headlines. We need your support.
And we remind you, you don't have to watch us in social media. Turn on your Roku or your Apple television. We're broadcasting live right now there. If our community is to grow, we must tell our stories and bring them to the attention of the broader world. This is the only place in the entire world that tells these type of LGBTQ plus stories in motion and sound. That's kind of a dig at John Hayden. That is the passion of Happening Out Television Network and Queer News Tonight. I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and on behalf of these LGBTQ plus reporters, the anchors of Queer News Tonight, including Dan Rios, John Hayden, Jeff Oliverio, and Gregg Shapiro. We will see you daily at 8 p.m. But before we end the show, we have one final story.
And once again, we're going to queer up politics. Special Debbie Wasserman-Schultz interview at My Hollywood Pride. As a part of the Hollywood LGBTQ plus Council, I was proud to be part of the inaugural My Hollywood Pride a few weeks ago. At the event, Al interviewed Congressperson Debbie Wasserman-Schultz about why elections matter and why members of our community have to get out and vote. Watch this.
Well, it's Al Ferguson with Queer News Tonight, and I'm very excited to say we're at the first ever My Hollywood Pride. And of course, the person standing with us here at Hollywood Pride needs no introduction. One of the greatest LGBTQ advocates in the nation, and that is Congressman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz.
Thank you so much.
We are so excited about this first ever Pride. I know you've been to so many of LGBT festivals and events here in Florida. What do you think about having a first ever Pride event like this?
This is really so consequential for our community, Al, because across South Florida, we obviously have a diverse and significant LGBTQ plus community, but you know, there are the known communities like Wilton, Manors, which I like to always say is the straight friendly city, Fort Lauderdale.
Or the gayest place on planet Earth.
Or the gayest place on planet Earth, exactly. To know it is to love it. Miami Beach.
Right.
Hollywood also has a significant and vibrant gay community, but it's one that sort of has floated under the radar. And now, because we have this significant historic kickoff event, it's going to help people come together and make sure that we can really put Hollywood on the map for the LGBT community across the world.
Most of the city is in your district.
Yes.
This morning at the kickoff brunch, I thought you made a super interesting point that I hadn't really thought about. The value of community is it represents, and you see the community, and you drew a distinction that Hollywood may not have as visible an LGBTQ community, and that's why it took so long to get there. Tell us a little bit about that philosophy.
So we always talk about how important it is with identity to be seen. If you're not seen, really seen, in terms of being recognized in a community, being able to recognize and socialize with your neighbors, with your friends, with your business owners, and you're not identifying as who you are very publicly, then I think there's more of a struggle. And when you have community, when you create community in an intentional way, it makes progress just so much more likely.
And another really motivational moment this morning with you at the brunch was talking about the history of the 2003 event here in Hollywood. Too long to explain in this interview, but you providing congressional recognition awards at the brunch this morning, but specifically at the brunch, the 100, meaning the HRC's designation of moving Hollywood in a relatively short period of time, the last 10 years, from a rating of 37 to 100%. What does that mean to you in terms of Hollywood is a city in your district representing the LGBTQ community as 100%. It's fabulous.
It's amazing, and really, my husband grew up in this community, ever since he was a little boy, and we live a little further out west now. But the progress that Hollywood has made as a city culturally is really can't be overstated. They really did earn that 37 back when they had it. Sadly, there were too many on the city commission here and in the leadership that were either actually bigoted or were just stuck in the old in the 20th century, so to speak. And so now the city has leadership that, as a result, has hired staff that is committed to implementing the really true commitment that the city has to equality and to making sure that everyone feels seen, feels heard, and feels represented.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're thrilled that we are all here, that you're here at Hollywood Pride. I have to take the opportunity to talk about some of the things that are going on in the news and going on in Washington.
Right.
Congressman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, as I said, is one of the leading voices in America for equality. You're an ally of the LGBTQ plus community. We're watching. You are such a central voice in the Equality Caucus in Congress and in Washington. We've watched the process of trying to get the Equality Act passed. Now this week we've watched the issue of the Voting Rights Act and its situation. The LGBTQ community is frequently confused. In 2006, under George Bush, 100% of the Republicans voted for extension of voting rights. This time around, we can't get a single vote. What is going on in Washington about voting and equality?
Unfortunately, the Republican Party has been taken over by right-wing extremists who worship at the altar of Donald Trump. There's no other way to say it. And they have no agenda. And when you have no agenda, all you have in your favor to get elected is if you shape the electorate to look like the people that would show up and be the majority of people that would vote for your candidates. And so voter suppression is the name of the game for them. They can't support voting rights because if the electorate looks like America, is expanded, and everyone has an equal opportunity to cast their ballot, then they're going to lose.
Yeah, and this election cycle in November, we face the midterms. We've got a critical Senate race at stake here in Florida.
Yes.
We have a very critical governor's race at stake here in Florida. From your seat and your experience in the politics, but also in understanding our community as such a leading ally, what would you say to the LGBTQ community? What do we need to do to help propel your mission and get us that 3% or 4% or 1%, whatever it takes to get us across the line? What would you say to the LGBTQ?
I am so glad you asked me that question because the LGBTQ plus community is a swing vote, literally all by itself. Think about the percentage of the population that the LGBTQ plus community already is, and the concentration in the electorate that they are and that they could be if there wasn't apathy, if there wasn't frustration about the progress. But we've made so much progress. Joe Biden's election literally reversed 4 years of decline and bigotry and policies that turned the clock back. And that was because we voted. And we've got to make sure that we can end Ron DeSantis' governorship, that we can elect Val Demings to the United States Senate, and that we can have a pro-equality majority in Congress.
You know, I know the South Florida LGBTQ community just heard what you said. I'm curious, when you say that to our community, there's a lot of fear growing. We took marriage equality for granted, and maybe marriage equality is back on the table, and certainly equality broadly. What's going on in our schools? What's going on in trans healthcare and sports, etc.
Yes.
Because of the fear that we're feeling in the LGBTQ community, I'm curious how it washes over you. We have all of these daunting hurdles that we see. Are you still optimistic that we can get there? What helps you get out of bed in the morning to go, all right, we're going to fight another day and we're going to get there? Are you optimistic?
I'm a glasses half full person, and I will tell you that the progress that I've been able to see for the LGBTQ plus community in the time that I have been in public office is so remarkable. But the thing that I was worried about when we won marriage equality finally, I would even say this out loud just after it happened, that's not all. We have so much left to fight for. That's why we have to pass the Equality Act. We're not done. And look, I remember standing on the House floor talking to Barney Frank, who was such an incredible mentor to me and still is. And I remember we were talking about the progress that when we had ENDA and we were trying to pass ENDA, and you remember we wanted to try pass gender inclusive ENDA, but we weren't quite there yet. So we've got to try to make sure we delight in incremental change and that we fight for even more. And look, this is going to be an uphill climb. We're in a difficult and dark place right now, but if good people throw the towel in, if good people in the community say, it's just not possible, I'm too tired, I'm too worried, and you succumb to that oppression, then we'll go backwards. Never mind not make progress.
That's right.
We can't afford that.
I hear you loud and clear. So there's optimism and your voice out and determination. One last thing, in this wonderful first time ever celebration in Hollywood, I want to come back to a story that I heard this morning at brunch that I didn't know. State of the Union. Tell us a little bit about your invitation. Wait, I understand that you went on the honeymoon with a couple of gay guys. Tell me about that.
I hosted their honeymoon. So Todd and Jeff Delmay, January 6th, like I said this morning, January 6th actually has a label of love for them
wait, and our capital and democracy was attacked. Is that what you're talking about, or something else?
I was referencing that, yes. But January 6th, let's remember, is the day that the decision in Florida was handed down to get rid of the Defense of Marriage Act and make marriage equality the law in the state. On that day, Todd and Jeff Delmay and several other couples who were the plaintiffs in that case, they got married. And it was an incredible celebration. But 2 weeks later was the State of the Union address. And I invited Todd and Jeff to be my guests at the State of the Union so we could celebrate that huge milestone. And they didn't have a honeymoon planned. Of course, they didn't know that they were going to actually be able to get married January 6th, if you think about it, because who knew what was going to happen. And so essentially, I hosted their honeymoon, and they were my guests at the State of the Union.
I wish you could be standing here right now and watch Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz as I'm watching her beam that she went on the honeymoon with two gay guys.
In Yiddish, they call it kfelling.
Yes, exactly, including the State of the Union. What a great thing that you did for them.
And they are such incredible leaders.
And beyond, for everyone, all of our listeners, in case you've been under a rock, Todd Delmay is the leader of the Hollywood LGBTQ Council, and it has been a centric grassroots organization in Hollywood as the Congresswoman describes how difficult this city was a decade ago, and he has fought and fought and fought in the organization of equality in the community without burning down any buildings and just stepping forward and saying what is right is right. And with allies like Congressman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, it's been accomplished here. 100% rating.
That's right.
Wow.
Absolutely. Remarkable.
That's what we're celebrating. Thank you. It's a wonderful story because I've never heard of an ally going on to gay guys' honeymoon. At the Capitol for the State of the Union address. I mean,
I felt very fortunate.
Yes, and I'm sure they did
but
too.
I sent them back to their hotel on their own.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We are so happy you're here and celebrating the entire community of Hollywood. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. Watch. She tells us we should be optimistic. We will be. We'll watch all year, and we've all got to work very hard to help support your efforts.
Absolutely.
LGBTQ plus news is